Morning, BookTube. Bill Ruttenberg here at the Ruttenberg Library. It's been a while since I've done a weekly reads, Friday reads. And since it's Friday, I thought it'd be appropriate to do a Friday reads. And so I wanted to catch you up on life and what's happening in my reading and what my plans are for the near future with my reading. And so recently, if you have been following the channel, I've done a couple of book hauls, and that's because I went out to Colorado and got to do some book shopping while I was out there. And I also got to meet a great booktuber, Peg, at the History Shelf. We met up at 2nd and Charles and did some book shopping and some talking together, and that was great. And like I said, we spent a week out in Colorado and got to do, I got to go to Mile High Comics, I got to go to 2nd and Charles, I got to go to the Barnes & Noble out there, and then we just enjoyed the week in Colorado. Got to go to, we were staying in Denver, but we got to go to Golden a couple of days, got to go to Buffalo Bill's thing there, his grave and his little museum. That was kind of in Lookout Mountain. That was kind of neat. And we'd done that before, but we had not done that with my youngest daughter. And so we got to take her up. And she thought that was pretty cool to be in the mountains, or at least the foothills of the mountains. But anyway, while I was out there, or no, before I got out there, I did finish the biography on Thaddeus Stevens. Thaddeus Stevens, Civil War Revolutionary, Fighter for Racial Justice by Bruce Levine. And that was a good book, all about Thaddeus Stevens, who was an abolitionist of sorts, or not of sorts, he was an abolitionist. He was working in the halls of Congress to get slavery abolished, and Thaddeus Stevens worked his whole life to try to end that. I did get to do a buddy chat, because this was a buddy read with Peg at the History Shelf, and so I'll put a link to that video down below, and please go check that out. Listen in on our conversation on what we thought of Thaddeus Stevens. He's one of my new heroes in American history. He's quite the interesting character. And I know I'm going to do some further reading. I have Fawn Brody's biography on him, and in the future I plan to read that and do some more learning on him. So, excuse me, while we went out to Colorado, we were listening to some audiobooks. So in this Friday Reads, I'm also going to include some audiobooks that we got done. So my wife and I had been listening to, she likes to watch, well, we all like to watch Chip and Joanna Gaines in their show, in their home makeover show, where they go and they buy a house, fix it up. I think Fixer Upper's the name of it. And they fix it up and then give it back to the homeowners. But we were listening to Capital Gains, Smart Things I Learned Doing Stupid Stuff by Chip Gaines. And we had read their earlier book, and I can't think of the name of it, but we had read their earlier book that was done by both of them. And in this book, this is basically the story of Chip and how he got going and the things that he learned in the business world. Now, this was it was a fun book, fun to listen to, because he's kind of a goofy guy, and I appreciate him. He's got a good heart and everything. I don't know if I would always go with his business plan, but it has worked for him, and he shares that in the book. And so we finished that book in the first half of the trip out to Colorado, and then because we had, I am sorry. It is kind of early with this video. Because we had our 4-year-old in the back of the car, we definitely wanted to keep her entertained as well. And so we also listened to Little House on the Prairie by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And so we got that book. We did most of it on the trip out, and then we finished it, the very last part, on the trip back from Colorado. And of course, that's the story of Laura Ingalls Wilder and her childhood, her and her sister Mary, and their little sister Carrie, and then their mother and father, Caroline, and I'm going blank, her dad. Their trip west, and they came out to Kansas, and they'd got some land. They built a log cabin, and it's just that whole story of the trip out and what it was like to live out on the prairie. And of course, that's a classic. I read all of those books with my oldest daughter, and we thoroughly enjoyed those. And so it was fun to listen to my daughter. Oh, wait, stop. And then she'd ask a question about what was going on, and then, okay, play. And so, yeah, you know that she was listening, paying attention, comprehending, and putting it into her own little world. And so that was a lot of fun to experience that for the very first time with her. Of course, we'd watched the TV show, and my daughter enjoys that, but it's always different listening to the book. And I hope to someday when she learns how to read, I'll do like I did with my oldest daughter, and we'll go through all of those books in the set and read them all. Let's see here. On the way back from Colorado, so let's just go ahead and throw that one out there. We read On the Banks of Plum Creek, which is another, of course, Laura Ingalls Wilder. They had to get out of Kansas territory, and they'd moved around, and they were in, I believe it was Minnesota, were they in southwest Minnesota? I know it was southern Minnesota, but they basically went out and they lived on the prairie. And this time, instead of building a log cabin, they lived in a dugout to start with, and that was quite the experience, because Caroline had never lived in one, and neither had, of course, the girls, the younger daughters. And so you read about all the adventures they had in that dugout, and how Laura and her sister are actually coming of age, where they can start to get a little bit of they start having to do chores, they get some responsibilities, and just what that was like, versus today's kids versus back then, and then also just the plight that their dad went through to make ends meet. You talk about an amazing man, and anybody in that generation that was doing that, out on the prairie stuff, they are a hardy stock. And he was walking, what did they say? Did he walk 300 miles, I think, to get a job, to make some money to send back home so that they could make ends meet, so they wouldn't have to leave the farm, and they could continue to stay there, because the crop, they had a drought come in, and the grasshoppers came in, and their crop didn't come through like they thought. Eventually the crop does come through, and they start to be able to get some nice household items, but they were on tough times, but Pa always made things meet, made ends meet, and that was just always neat to see what he would go through to help his family. So while I was out in Colorado at my sister-in-law's, I had read a baseball biography. I wanted to have an easy read that I would enjoy. We just got done with baseball season a week before that, and so I read Mookie, Life, Baseball, and the '86 Mets by Mookie Wilson with Eric Sherman. And then there's also a foreword by Keith Hernandez. And so I read this baseball biography, thoroughly enjoyed that. I will say, not the best piece of work. It was the writing wasn't all that great, but I just enjoy the baseball stories, and so for me it was all right. I did not mind. This is one of those books I picked up for $1 at Dollar Tree, so even if I didn't like it, it wasn't like I was out a lot. I enjoyed the story, and the story of the '86 Mets. Of course, that's the famous World Series where the unfortunate Bill Buckner had the ball go between his legs. Red Sox first baseman had the ball go between his legs, and basically changed the total momentum of the game, and not only lost Game 6, but changed the momentum going into Game 7, as Mookie Wilson talks about in the book. It was just a momentum changer, and they knew they had the game won. And of course, this '86 Mets team was just a dominating team. They had, the hitting. They had Darryl Strawberry, Keith Hernandez, and several other guys. They had the pitching with Doc Gooden and Ron Darling, and they had the whole. They had the complete package, and so it was fun to listen to, and Mookie brings a whole nother point of view, because that team was very well known for its drinking and carousing and all the negative stuff that came with the '86 Mets. Mookie was like the opposite of that. He did not drink, but he never got alienated by the guys, so that was kind of neat to see that he could stand by his convictions and not suffer for it. He was a veteran at this time. And so he talks about not only this '86 season, which is, kind of the bulk of the book, obviously, but he also talks about early in his career and when he came to the Mets, and he was with the Mets when they were pretty awful, and he got to see the total transformation of the New York Mets. And then but unfortunately, he also got to see the 87 and 88, they still had a good team, but then it quickly got dismantled, and they brought in players that did not necessarily go well with that group of guys in '86 that knew how to win ball games. And so, he talks about that low point when he started, the peak of the World Series, and then, the decline. And of course, he eventually gets traded, and his career goes into decline, and he eventually gets into coaching, though, and he also gets into the ministry. He becomes a minister, and so that was really neat to see. So again, not very well written as far as the prose. It's just a lot of storytelling. It's like sitting down for a coffee with him and listening to him tell stories. So some of the stories become a little redundant. He comes back to the same message over and over. Like, he's got a whole chapter on his relationship with Bill Buckner, because Mookie Wilson is the guy who hit the ball that went between his legs. And, of course, Bill Buckner lost the series. And so he talks about that relationship that he builds with Bill Buckner. And he spends a whole chapter on that, but it becomes very redundant. So you just kind of have to like these kind of biographies. But if you're a baseball fan, you might want to pick that up if you can find it. I like baseball biographies, so it did not bother me. I just kind of take it for a grain of salt that I know it's not a Pulitzer Prize winning book. So anyway, the next book that I finished when I got back, I started working in my classroom when I got back, and I had went to the library before we went to Colorado, and I had got the audiobook of Hatchet by Gary Paulson, which is a middle grade book, you could probably read it as a fourth grader, but kids in seventh grade are still reading it. So fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, right in there, that age of kids love this book, and I loved it in sixth grade. That's when I came across this, and we were looking for books for my 4-year-old for the trip to Colorado, and we happened to see my wife told me to go look, because she didn't really like any of the selection they had. And I went and looked, and I saw Hatchet, and I was like, oh, even if she doesn't, this isn't for her, this is for me, just because. And so when I got back into my classroom, the week we got back from Colorado, I started putting things on the wall, putting up my bulletin boards and stuff, and I was listening to Hatchet as I was doing that, listening to that in the background. So I finished Hatchet, just a great book, one of my favorites of all time. I probably didn't like it as much as when I listened to it in sixth grade. I listened to my teacher read it, and then eventually a year or two later I read it again, and I've read it again since then. But as an adult now, maybe I don't like it as much, but it's still enjoyable. It still brings back those great memories of when I was a kid. So the next book that I read was a biography that I had picked up at Second and Charles while I was out in Colorado, and this is Abraham Lincoln by George McGovern. This is from the American Presidents series, which is a series of presidential biographies that the editors Arthur Schlesinger Jr. and Sean Wiltz had put this together, but this is like a very slim volume. It was 184 pages. But I really, really liked this book. This was a great book for as short a book, and as far as text goes, it was like 150, what was it, 155 pages. And as far as the text goes, this was, I thought, a fabulous book for so short a book. It did an excellent job of telling the story of Abraham Lincoln. And I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I always enjoy a good Lincoln book, and I thought this was a good one. I would recommend anybody who wants a real short read, who is just coming on, to Lincoln, reading Lincoln, to pick this up. This is a great book. It doesn't go into a ton of detail, only 150 pages of text, 155 pages of text. So it can't go into a ton of detail, but it does a really good job of skimming the top. Matter of fact, I think what I'm going to do with my, we always have a budget for our middle school classrooms, or all teachers have a budget to work within. And for my middle school classroom, I think I'm going to start picking up these real short 150-page biographies in this President's series. I think they'd be worth putting into my classroom. The kids sometimes get intimidated by a 300, 400, 500-page book. So you put these shorter books in and really whet their appetite, and then maybe they'll dip into those bigger books. But really like that book, and it's just a basic overview of his entire presidency. There's, it doesn't really hit on one area versus another. It's the whole thing. So the next book that I finished in these last couple weeks was The Trigger: Hunting the Assassin Who Brought the World to War by Tim Butcher. Now, I started this the first couple days we were in Colorado before I went to the Mookie Wilson book. But I started this in the first couple days and then got back to it the last couple of days after I finished that biography. But this is a book that I got from Todd at Todd's Bursting Bookcase. He had sent this to me in a big old box of books that he was giving me. And it was one of them that stood out that I was like, oh, I got to read that. And I'll admit, it was a cover read. I thought the cover was just excellent. I love that cover. I thought this was, without doing, a little bit more reading on it before I got started, I thought it was going to be more of a history of Gavrilo Princip and the assassination of the Archduke to start World War I. Because I wanted to get to know a little bit more about Princip. What I read about him was very, very small, like literally like a paragraph in different books that I'd read. I'd read nothing, in detail on him, and so I always just kind of in my mind painted him as such a bad guy. You know what I mean? With a picture like that mug shot, that's not a good mug shot. I mean, he just looks like a thug in that picture, and so that's just where my mind has always went. So I wanted to learn more about him. I did find that this book was not necessarily just strictly a biography of Princip, which was in that respect a little disappointing. What he did write about Princip was excellent. I learned quite a bit about Princip, but most of the book was not about Princip. It was about the overall background of the peoples in the Balkan areas. And so he gives a overall history from, the beginnings of the Austrian Empire coming in. Well, even before that, because he talks about some of the independence they had found, and then the Austrian Empire coming in and absorbing them. He talks about World War I, World War II, the Cold War era. He talks a lot about the Bosnian War in the 1990s. And the author, Tim Butcher, and there's a picture of our author. He was a journalist, a correspondent in Bosnia at the time, and so he's giving his firsthand accounts of what was going on in the 1990s, and then he backs up giving a history of what caused all of that. And he talks about the cultural differences. He talks a lot about just the different religious differences, independence in that area versus the Austrian Empire coming in and ruling them. So he does a really good job in the book. It just wasn't what I was expecting. So I don't want you to think it's a bad book. I think it's a really good book. It just wasn't what I was expecting. He goes on the journey. The author goes on the journey that Gavrilo Princip went on. So basically he finds a buddy that he knew from the time he was in Bosnia, during the wars. He finds a buddy, and they actually hike the entire trip. They go to Principe's birthplace, and they visit with some family that are still living in the exact same spot when, in the house that he was born in and grew up in. And then they literally walk the path that Gavrilo Principe and his father walk as they headed towards Sarajevo and, other areas that they ended up living in. And he walks that whole path, and that is not an easy thing to do because it's a very mountainous area. And on top of that, because of the Bosnian wars, there's minefields all over the place. Minefields, mines that have not exploded yet. And so as he's walking, they have to go find guides and stuff to help them on this path so that they don't literally blow themselves up. So that was really kind of interesting as they went through this. But as he's doing this, he's telling the story of when he was there in the 1990s, and then that history of, especially that communist background that was in the area. So good book. Gives a little bit about Principe, a lot about the background of the Balkans area, especially the 1990s war. So go check that out if you're looking for that, because the author did a great job not only walking that trail, he went and found records that had been buried in the past. Went and found his school records and all that kind of stuff that they don't necessarily put out a lot of information on Gavrilo Principe to this day. They don't put a lot of information out about him. He's kind of a buried character in history in that area, and the author does a good job of unburying him and goes to his grave, and just, I don't know, kind of a neat little travel log. Matter of fact, there's a quote on the back of this that is like tells it exactly like it is. Let me find it here. Says, Tim Butcher has rewritten history with his evocative and moving journey in the footsteps of the assassin who sparked the First World War. Instead of a naive and misguided Serbian nationalist, he reveals an intelligent, determined South Slav patriot who gave his life for the cause. The Serbian state should not have been held to account. A superb and important book. It tells, let's see, another one of the, I can't find it. There was one that talks about, it's a travelogue. Anyway, oh, here it is right there. Says, Tim Butcher was one of the bravest and kindest foreign journalists who saw the Bosnian War. He has written a splendid book, part memoir, part history of that country, ingeniously using the assassin of 1914 as the anti-hero. It takes place among classics of Balkan history, and that was from Norman Stone. The first one was from William Boyd. But anyway, I liked how he put that. A splendid book, part memoir, part histories. That's really true on how the book's written. So go check that out if you're looking for some Balkan history. The next book that I read, I also got at Second in Charles. This was just excellent. I really like this. I don't read a ton of memoirs, but this one was good because Doris Kearns Goodwin is one of my favorite authors. She's an excellent, excellent writer, storyteller, and historian. Wait till next year. And Doris Kearns Goodwin is going to tell about her childhood in the very late 1940s. Like, I think she starts in 48, 49, right in there, and goes through the 1950s. And it's kind of like 49 to 1957. It's kind of the time period it really, really hits. But she tells a story of her childhood. What was it like to live on the block that she was living? You know, she lived outside of New York in one of the suburbs, and like all New Yorkers in the 1950s, that was the golden age of baseball, or one of the golden ages of baseball, and you had three major New York teams that were always vying for the playoffs, you know, going to the World Series. The Brooklyn Dodgers, which Goodwin was a huge fan of. You got the New York Yankees and the New York Giants. And it's a lot of fun, this book is, because she uses baseball as the background, as kind of the timeline that carries the whole story following her Brooklyn Dodgers through all their triumphs and tragedies, and there were a lot of both, where they would get to the World Series and then lose it, find a way to lose the World Series. They did finally win it towards the end, but she talks about these high points and just how it affected all of the people that lived around her and in her neighborhood. And she does an excellent job of describing in her childhood the type of people that were living in her neighborhood. They had, Yankee fans, Giant fans, Dodger fans, but they also had Catholics, they had Jews, they had Protestants, all living in the same area, and they lived peacefully together. Everybody recognized that everybody had their own religion, and they were okay with that. They were very tolerant of that, from her memoirs here. And she used some of the high points of history. She talks about what the McCarthy hearings did to her and her friends, and how they mimicked Joseph McCarthy as as he put people on trial, and it was on TV, and all the moms were watching it in the neighborhood, and then her and her friends would go and they'd put somebody on trial each day, and then they would start accusing them, and it became pretty hateful, just like the McCarthy hearings did. So that was pretty cool listening to that. There was she had a chapter about growing up in the Catholic Church and the steps that she went through to become a Catholic, and just how that affected her life, and just the different, as she went through the classes, as she took First Communion, as she gave her confession, all that kind of stuff, her first confession, and what her religious life meant to her as a child. And there's a point in the book where she talks about there was a train wreck, and two trains hit head on, and a lot of deaths, and a lot of people went to the hospital and stuff, and she actually snuck out of the house, and she was really worried about people who were riding that train, who if you don't get your last rites, you don't go to heaven. And if I'm understanding that correctly anyway. And so she wanted to go help give last rites to people and give them a chance to get to heaven, and give them, anyway, she snuck there, saw a lot of death, and then snuck back in her house. And she had bad dreams for quite a while, and it really bothered her. And then she didn't want her father riding the train into the city to go to work. She was scared to death her father was going to die on a train. And so then it carries her forward into, her father says, well, why don't you, he goes, it's perfectly safe. That was a, abnormal event, an anomaly. It's perfectly safe. Why don't you come to work with me? And so he took her to work for the day, and that was like a big highlight in her life. And she got to talk baseball. She was a huge baseball nut, and she got to talk baseball with the men on the train, and as they traveled from the suburbs into the city, and she got to see how well respected her father was in the banking industry. And it was a pretty cool little story. But she's got all of these little stories, how you had the neighborhood butcher, the neighborhood general store, and all these kind of things that were still big before, like the Walmarts and Kmarts and stuff hit it big. When you had the mom and pop stores, and she talks all about that and how it all tied the neighborhood together. Your block parties and how that tied the neighborhood together. Getting the first TV on the block, and how the next neighbor would get one the next year, and it was just a little bit bigger and a little bit better, and then the next one was a little bit bigger, a little bit better. And so that was kind of fun, and how TV totally changed their lives, and her relationship with their family. And her mom was sick for a lot of her childhood, and she eventually did pass away, and just how that greatly affected their family. So anyway, memoir on Doris Kearns Goodwin, excellent showpiece of what it was like living in the suburbs of the late 1940s into, pretty much throughout the 1950s. Great book. She does an excellent job telling her story. And then the last book on this Friday Reads that I got done over the last couple of weeks, and I've been working on this one a while, but here this last week I've I have read almost 100, I think it was like 100 pages a day. This is a monster of a book, but oh my gosh, is this an awesome family saga or what? This is a 5-star rating, definitely. Fall of Giants by Ken Follett. If you have not read this book, go read this book. Great piece of historical fiction. It is a trilogy. I am planning on reading the other two. I have them. Here's the third one, and the second one's right here beside me. But this is the story of, basically, it starts in 1914 and it takes it through, I think it was 1924 at the very end of the book. But it takes several different families, intertwines their families in the World War I time period, living through the war, the revolutionary movements that were going. It's got everything you need in a good book. It is big. It is like thick and heavy. It was 985 pages. It's a big book. But oh my gosh, does Ken Follett do an excellent, excellent job with the characters in this book, developing these characters. You've got a couple of Russian brothers. One is a revolutionary in Lenin's communist movement. You've got his brother is a bit of a you can't count on him for anything. He ends up immigrating to America, and he always finds himself in trouble. He's a womanizer and always finding himself in trouble. He gets involved in some pretty bad stuff. And you've got another upper-class English family, brother and sister, and the brother is also a womanizer, and he's married to a Russian princess, and his sister is in the women's rights movement, getting the women the right to vote in Britain, and so you get to go along on that journey. And she's in love, she's an English woman in love with a German, and the German is going to end up fighting in the German army, and of course her brother's going to fight in the British army. And there's also the story of an American, he becomes kind of a diplomat. He works with Woodrow Wilson, and he's in love with the same girl that the Russian brother who moved to America, he's in love with the same girl to start with, and that's got an interesting ending. But he works with Woodrow Wilson. He's involved in trying to get peace. Anyway, he gets in the American army. The Russian brother ends up, the one that moved to America, ends up in the American army. The British brother ends up in the British army. I mean, they all end up fighting each other, essentially, on different sides of the war. And Ken Follett does one heck of a job of intertwining those stories. And this is not just it's got World War I in the background, but it's not just, killing. It has all of the drama that families go through, especially messed up families. I also forgot to mention, on the British side of things, you've got the upper class family that I told you about, but there's also the story of a coal mining family where the dad is the leader of the union movement and in the coal mines, and his son goes down to the coal mines to work, and he becomes very much involved in those movements as well throughout the story. You see his evolution throughout the story. He has a sister who goes and works in the rich guy's family. She ends up falling for the womanizing fits, and he or she ends up pregnant, and you end up following the plight of women who are going through having a baby out of wedlock and that whole part. And so we see, and she ends up becoming, moving her way up, and so we see in this book, we see rich versus poor. We see the working class movements, in the socialist movements, and the communist movement. So we see a little bit of this and a little bit of that. We also see the rich side of things and what the upper class, how they were trying to control and hold power as the lower class were trying to get it. We see women's rights and how women got the right to vote, and we go along this journey with the coal miners and what was it like to, the chapter on you know, being down in the coal mine itself, and when there's an accident in the coal mine. We see those relationships as far as the culture of rich versus poor. I don't know, guys. There is so much going on in this book. This is an awesome, awesome read. And I know it was, you know, 985 pages, but don't let that intimidate you. It reads extremely fast. You can easily, if you've got a couple hours to sit down, you can easily read 100 pages a day and finish it in a week and a half. You know, you can kind of chunk it like that. I highly recommend this book. I am so excited about the next book. So that's what I've read over the last couple of weeks. What I plan on reading now, this next week, school starts next Thursday, and so I'd like to get one more book read before school starts. And I am reading right now. This is a book that Peg had given me. She was cleaning out her collection, and this is an advanced reader that she had given me. And it comes out in October. I think it was October. I don't have the paper with me. I have it somewhere. I'll tell you in the book haul. Nope, I lied. I'll tell you right now. This comes out October 12th of this year, so the day before my birthday. And anyway, advanced reader copy. This is Brett Baer's new series, To Rescue the Republic, Ulysses S. Grant, The Fragile Union in the Crisis of 1876. And so far, it is good. I am in chapter 3, 55 pages in, and thoroughly enjoying it. And I should have this read. I should finish it next Wednesday. I figure if I read 3 chapters a day, and they read pretty quick. If I read 3 chapters a day, it's divided into 5 parts, so 15 chapters in 5 parts. So if I read 1 part each day, I can have this done by next Wednesday, the day before school starts. So I'm really excited about this. So far, it's been talking about the young life of Ulysses S. Grant. Right now, he's out on the West Coast. They just got done with the Mexican War, and he's out on the West Coast, and he's just resigned from the Army. And so we're getting ready. He's heading back east to be with his wife. So this is going to be interesting. He's going to talk about, right now it's building up his background, and then he'll talk about his leadership during the Civil War, and of course it's eventually going to lead to his presidency and how he showed true leadership at the end of his presidency. The next book that I started, I only got like 2 pages in because I was really tired last night, and so I started watching TV, and was going to watch the Chicago White Sox and the New York Yankees game I had taped, and I realized that only 17 minutes of it taped. That was depressing. I didn't get to watch any of the ball game. And if you guys didn't know, that was the Field of Dreams game, so they were playing it here in Iowa at where the movie Field of Dreams, in the middle of that cornfield. They actually built a stadium, a miniature stadium there, and they were playing their baseball game there. And I wanted to watch that last night. We had our baseball banquet last night for the high school, and it was at the same time as the game. And so I DVR'd it, or so I thought I DVR'd it, and it ended up only taping 17 minutes. That was depressing. I didn't realize, I don't know what I did wrong with my DVR, but anyway, so last night when I went to bed, I had kind of baseball in my head, so I didn't read for very long. I only read like the first 3 pages, I think. But I did get this started. It is Winter of the World by Ken Follett, which is book 2 of the Century Trilogy. I'm really looking forward to this. And it's going to go, so the first book was through World War I. This one is going to go through the 1930s and then in through World War II. And it's taking basically the first book, all of those couples had kids. And so this is the story of their kids, is what it looks like anyway. I think most of these main characters are still in there, but it's going to go to the second generation here. And so I'm really looking forward to this. Can't really tell you much because I only read the first couple pages. I do know that one of the main characters is the married couple. One is dead set against, in Germany, is dead set against Hitler. And then her husband is like, well, why rock the boat? Let's just go with it. Let's just, he's kind of a, maybe he's not a dead set what's the word I want to use? Dead set for Hitler, but he's kind of just going with the flow. And then over these next few weeks, something I would really like to do, and I think I'm going to do it during the daytime this next week, and especially over this weekend, is I really want to get this finished. American Caesar by William Manchester, basically the biography of Douglas MacArthur. And I'm halfway through. I've picked it up. You know, I've had issues. I'm on page 330, where I read about 100 pages at a time, and then I put it down and go read 3 or 4 books, and then I come back and read another 100 pages. And so I'd really like to knock this thing out, because I know Peg at the History Shelf, she bought this at Second and Charles while we were there. She bought the exact same edition and everything. And she was wanting to read this. I wanted to read it and maybe share our thoughts back and forth on what we thought. Maybe not do a video, but you know, just through Voxer we could talk about that. So I want to get this read. And I started it, I am sad to say, I started this clear back in January 1st. I would really like to get it done. I don't want to have to say it took me a year to read this. So I want to knock that out. So those are my reading plans right as of this moment, but who knows? I picked up a handful of books that I really am looking forward to reading, so that my reading plans might change. I might switch books, I don't know. I'm going to try to stick to getting these done, because I want to just get them done, especially this American Caesar. I want to get it knocked out. But anyway, BookTube, I've been rambling, telling you about these books. I was real excited about all these books. Sorry the video ran for so long, but it's just been a good couple weeks of reading. I got more read this summer than I did last summer, like twice as much, which is surprising considering we had COVID and we were stuck indoors last year. But I got a lot read, thoroughly enjoyed it. I think I might even do, I don't know, I was thinking about doing some book reviews on maybe a couple of these, I don't know. I know there's some book tags I got to get caught up on, and I also have a book haul, or what I'll call a mail haul, because she was going to mail them to me till we met up out in Denver, but mail haul from Peg, and then Todd's Bursting Bookcase sent me 2 big boxes of books. I'm going to break that into, because there's so many books in there, I'm going to break it into 4 different book hauls. So I've got some book hauls coming if you enjoy those. And then my wife, when we got home, or maybe it was when we got in the car after Second and Charles, I can't remember, but she looked at me and she goes, because I got a lot of books, keep that in mind. She kind of looked at me and she goes, "Can we agree that you are done buying books for this year?" And I agreed to that, because I did get quite a few books. Now, I know I want to get John Grisham book, and then H.W. Brands is coming out with a new one that I would really like to get. But other than that, I'm going to try very, very hard not to buy any more books. I'm going to try to keep my wife happy. So, till next time, BookTube, I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for watching, especially if you stayed the entire 43 minutes. Till next time, happy reading.